Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 Mechanics Deep Dive and Guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we'll be covering the wild shape forms. Druids are an incredibly powerful class at all stages of the game, and a big chunk of that power, especially early on, is access to the awesome strength of wild shape. But all of the wild shapes are not created equal, and it can be hard to use the right ones in the right situations. There's a lot of complexity to the decisions around wild shaping. There's just a lot of different options as well, so it can be hard to figure out which ones are the best. There's also a ton of weird rules interactions with wild shape, so knowing what actually will work and what won't can be pretty difficult, and it's not really explained anywhere in-game, so we're going to be covering all of that as well. So today I'm going to be going through each wild shape at every level that you get access to it and as it improves. And we'll talk about their strengths and weaknesses, when to use that wild shape form, what they actually do, and how to get the best use out of them. Now before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to John Yudden for the extremely generous $100 donation, Tarantula for the $20, David Ramos for the $2, and Peaceful Oz and Christy Cutter for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. It really means so much to me. I really appreciate it. All right, let's talk wild shapes. So first, just a quick overview of how wild shape actually functions when you use it in-game. You get wild shape at level 2 of Druid, and if you are a Moon Druid, it takes a bonus action to activate. If you're any other form of Druid, it takes your full action to activate. When you do, you choose one of your available wild shape forms, and you turn into that beast. Turning into a beast does a whole bunch of things, but most importantly, it gives you the hit points and physical attributes of that creature. So you replace your physical attributes, your strength, dexterity, and constitution, with those of the animal, and also replace your hit points with those of the animal. When you lose all of those hit points, you just revert back to your normal form with whatever hit points you had before you wild shaped. Meaning that druids, because they get 2 wild shape charges per short rest, have many more times the effective hit point pool than other characters, making them surprisingly incredibly tanky. Druids will be able to full heal in combat when they drop out of wild shape form by wild shaping again, and it's not on a long cooldown. You get 2 of them per short rest, so you can use this to tank a ton of incoming damage, especially as a Moon Druid who can do it as a bonus action. Also, in wild shape, you lose the ability to use most of your activated class abilities, and you lose the ability to cast spells or benefit from most items in the game. But there are some things that work while you're in wild shape. Firstly, most class and feat passives will still work. So feats like Alert will still function. Racial passives like Halfling's ability to reroll ones will still function, and class passives like Barbarian's fast movement will still function while you're in wild shape. Some other feats that have activated abilities won't work. You can't use the Charger feat while you're in wild shape, but anything that has a passive bonus will work. The most important of these is Tavern Brawler, because most wild shapes attack with their unarmed strikes, with unarmed attacks, and benefit from the full value of Tavern Brawler, doubling their strength bonus to hit and damage, increasing your wild shape form's damage output dramatically. So most characters that are going to focus on wild shape will be using Tavern Brawler. A couple other things work if you activate them before you enter wild shape. If you rage first as a barbarian, you keep the benefits of the rage while in wild shape. If you are concentrating on a spell, you don't lose concentration on that spell. You can't cast a new spell, but you can keep concentrating on a spell while you're in wild shape. Most items don't function, but a couple do, and usually they'll list that they function. There's a full list of everything that works in wild shape on the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki, which I will link below. But what you should know basically is that when you enter wild shape, you're going to keep your mental attributes, you're going to get a whole bunch of new health, and you're going to be using the animal's abilities rather than your own, except for passives from classes and feats. Those you mostly carry over. I'm also going to mention, before we jump into examining the individual wild shape forms, that While you can get a pretty significant advantage by changing your wild shape forms depending on the situation, and learning what they all do is still very useful, if you're just looking for a very, very quick heuristic as to what wild shapes you should be using at what level, then it's hard to go wrong by turning into a spider up until level 6, and then turning into an owlbear from level 6 until level 10, and then if you're a moon druid, turning into an earth myrmidon starting at level 10, and if you're not a moon druid, continuing to turn into an owlbear. While you can use a lot of the other wild shape forms to optimize further than that, that's a solid baseline, and so if you're just looking for a quick hit or TLDR, then that will serve you reasonably well. So when you first get access to wild shape at level 2, you have access to 4 wild shapes: badger, spider, wolf, and cat. And then if you're a moon druid, you also have bear wild shape. Halsin has one unique wild shape as well. He has his cave bear wild shape, which works very slightly differently, so I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. These wild shape forms have a certain number of hit points, and those hit points will go up every 2 druid levels, as will some of their damaging abilities, but mostly by very small amounts. And so while the damage will increase, mostly you're going to be looking at the base damage in order to decide whether this wild shape form does adequate damage. The way that the hit points increase is a little bit odd. Instead of increasing linearly, gaining, say, 8 hit points every 2 levels, they increase non-linearly, gaining a percentage of their previous hit points every 2 levels, and that percentage compounds. So for the spider form, the spider gains 30% rounded down of its previous hit points every 2 levels. So at level 2, it has 20 hit points. At level 4, it has 26. And at level 6, it has 34, gaining more hit points each time. What that means is that the wild shape forms that start with small amounts of hit points are going to have a much lower HP in the end game than the ones that start with a higher total, because it's multiplicative rather than additive, increasing the hit points. So a badger starts with only 13 compared to the spider's 20. They both scale at 30%, and so the badger will have a lot less HP than the spider by the time you reach level 12. The one exception is the wolf, which scales at 40%, so while it starts with only 18 hit points, it's going to end up with the highest hit point total at level 12. The first wild shape form is the badger form, who's extremely cute, but unfortunately not very strong. The badger form has 13 base HP and increases that by 30% every 2 levels, up to 49 health at level 12, making it the lowest health of the combat forms. It also only has 10 armor class base. You can increase this with mage armor or bark skin, similar effects, but in general it's going to have the lowest AC and lowest HP of the combat wild shape forms, and thus be pretty squishy. You can use that in order to deliberately attract enemy attacks if you have a party member that you really don't want to get hit, like they're concentrating on haste. You can use Badger Form for that, but primarily as a defensive tool, Badger Form is going to be outclassed by the other wild shape forms that have more armor class and health. Offensively, it has 3 different actions. You have the Bite action for 2d4 plus 2 damage, and then this will also get some bonus damage as you level up. At level 4, it gets an extra d6 of damage on top of that, and then that goes up to an extra d8 at level 8, I believe. And then that becomes an extra d10 at level 12. But mostly the marginal increase in damage is not going to be that significant. So its melee attack is also not great. 2d4 plus 2 is sort of equivalent to what a martial character would be doing with just their normal attacks at this level, but it's nothing super spectacular. The Claws ability is basically the same. It has exactly the same damage, except you also get to push the enemy back 5 feet. They have to make a strength saving throw, or they get knocked 5 feet backwards. So which of these you're going to be using is mostly dependent on whether you want to knock enemies 5 feet backwards or not. You usually will, because there are lots of times where being able to reposition enemies is going to be helpful, and so the Claws ability having a knockback associated with it can be fine. The fact that it's only a 5-foot knockback really does hold it back, though. Finally, you have the Burrow ability, which lets you spend 20 feet of your movement speed. So if you use Burrow, you spend you spend 2/3 of your movement speed, or if you're Halsin, because he has the bonus Wood Elf movement speed, a little bit less than that. In order to go 40 feet, so it's a teleport, it takes your action, and then enemies near the area, not allies, only enemies near the area, have to make a dexterity save or be knocked prone. You can see here, if we do Burrow, it says nearby creatures, but that's actually a lie. Our allies don't have to make the saving throw. Now, being able to knock enemies prone in an AoE is always good, but the problem with this is that it's a dexterity save, and most wild shape forms use the Druid's saving throw in order to calculate the save DCs of their abilities. But the Burrow ability for the Badger is fixed at DC 13, and so enemies will almost always pass it. So unfortunately, the Badger is stuck in a kind of awkward situation where it has the worst defenses, not great attacks, and because of some bugs, its only sort of attractive ability doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, and so usually I would suggest avoiding the Badger unless you want to use it to deliberately draw attacks by tanking your armor class as low as possible in order to protect, say, a character concentrating on haste. Also, one other thing worth mentioning is if you're a Moon Druid, all wild shape forms come with this Lunar Mend ability, which lets you, as a bonus action, spend your hit points, spend your spell slots to recover 1d8 HP per spell slot level that you spend. This can save you in an emergency, but your wild shape hit points are mostly there to protect your real hit points. So generally, I wouldn't suggest using Lunar Mend that often unless you really need to stay in wild shape form. Just use a bonus action on your next turn to re-wild shape. Next up, the Spider form. So the Spider form has 20 HP, and 14 armor class, which isn't bad for level 1. The AC is obviously a little bit low, but you're basically, or level 2, excuse me. The AC is obviously a little bit low, but you're basically a fighter in terms of your tankiness at this level, and enemies will have kind of a hard time getting through your 20 health in order to get at your actual hit points, so Spider form is pretty survivable. You gain 30% of your HP every 2 levels, going up to 74 by level 12, which, again, isn't amazing, but is still a reasonable quantity of hit points that enemies have to get through before they can actually hurt your character. So the Spider, despite having really low armor class in the late game, because that doesn't improve, still is relatively tanky in terms of how much damage you can absorb before you need to use your actual health. It also comes with a few offensive abilities. You have Venomous Bite, which does a d8 plus 3 piercing damage, and then it gets an extra d6 at level 4, and that grows at the same rate as the Badger one. The damage on this is quite low. A d8 plus 3 at level 2... a d8 plus 3 at level 2 is fine, but it doesn't scale that well over the course of the levels. But it also comes with a DC 13 Constitution save, or the enemy becomes poisoned, getting disadvantage on all of their attack rolls. The poison is unlikely to happen that frequently. Enemies will typically have pretty good con saves, and so you won't be able to apply poison that often. But when it comes up, it's definitely nice. The real bonus for the Spider, though, is that it has Web, and the Spider can, as a bonus action, activate Web and fire a web with a 15-foot radius, so 30 feet across, a huge, difficult terrain surface. This is a bonus action that you can activate every turn while you're in combat, giving you incredible early-game crowd control, and the webs here remain relevant throughout the entire game. The save DC against the web is a dexterity save, and it uses your druid's spell save DC, so enemies will fail pretty frequently. And weirdly, the spider's web, the wild-shaped spider's web, is a dex save to break out instead of a strength save. Most webs are strength saves to break out. This one's a dexterity save, and since being webbed gives you disadvantage on dexterity saves, they will have disadvantage trying to break out of this web. So it works even better than you might think it does, in order to keep enemies trapped. In addition to that incredible crowd control, you also have the Arachnid Jump feature, which is a bonus action to jump 37 feet, but it doesn't take any of your movement speed to activate it. So the The spider is extremely mobile and can actually get up on high ground and move around very easily, while also keeping enemies trapped in place. This is what makes it the best overall combat form for the early game. When in doubt, go spider, because you have decent damage, you have decent survivability, and you have incredible crowd control. Next up, wolf form, and this is the damage form for early levels for druids. So wolf form has 18 hit points, 2 less than the spider, and also 14 armor class, so the same AC but slightly fewer HP. However, the wolf form scales at 40% of its base HP every 2 levels, and so ends up with higher hit points than the spider. By level 6, you have 35 to the spider's 34, and by level 12, you have 97 to their 74. So the wolf will scale its hit points a little bit better than the spider will. That doesn't make a huge difference. Mostly the low armor class is still going to get this character hit pretty frequently, but having some extra hit points does make you a little more survivable. You also do the best damage of the early game wild shape forms with 2d6 plus 3 on your bite, which is a pretty good damaging boost. This is the same as a greatsword attack at level 2. And you also have the exposing bite ability, which when you hit an enemy, and if they get hit, the next attack against them from within 5 feet will be an automatic critical. Automatic criticals are incredibly powerful and remain relevant throughout the game. Exposing Bite is very good, even in the late game. All it requires is that you hit your attack. You don't have to actually, they don't have to make a saving throw or anything, and you just get a guaranteed critical from your next character. You're usually going to want to use this with a different character, because a critical bite on... using Exposing Bite and then getting a critical bite with the wolf isn't that exciting, but if you have a rogue there or a paladin there, you can guarantee a gigantic damage boost, and so this Exposing Bite ability works extremely well in high melee damage parties. Inciting Howl is the wolf's other ability. It lets you, as an action, give allies 10 feet of extra movement during their next turn. Activating this before combat starts is pretty good. It just gives you a little bit of extra mobility to get on top of enemies. It recharges every battle, so this is just a turn 1 movement boost available if you're in wolf form. Overall, the wolf is pretty good if you just want high damage, so if you're looking for crowd control, go spider. If your party has a lot of that but needs more damage output, then wolf is pretty good, and against encounters where damage is premium, like you need to kill an enemy mage really quickly, then wolf form can be better. Cat form. Cat form has 2 HP and I think 10 armor class. Actually 12 armor class. I've actually really never looked at the AC on the cat form because you don't use it in combat. It doesn't scale its hit points. It's an out-of-combat exploration form, and it comes with one ability, Meow, which lets you distract nearby creatures. So when you meow, things will come running over. This is basically the same as if you had cast Minor Illusion or started playing an instrument, so you can gather characters and then steal stuff or whatever. Also, because it's a small creature, you can go through pipes, but of course this is for out-of-combat exploration, and you can go through pipes and fissures. Mostly for the distracting ability, you'd rather use Minor Illusion, but cat form is just fun to run around in. If you're a moon druid, you also have access to polar bear form. The polar bear has 30 hit points and 12 armor class, which does at early levels make it tankier than the spider or wolf form because the hit points matter more than the AC. At later levels, just getting hit 10% more of the time is going to make the bear often die faster, even though it has more HP. But it does scale up to having 111 HP at maximum level, at level 12, which is almost always going to be a full turn of attacks, even from powerful enemies, just to get through your bear form's hit points. And so this can save you a lot of health, and also because it has really low HP, or low AC, it can distract enemies into attacking the bear form instead of your more vulnerable allies. So this is sort of the premium distraction form. It's better than the badger for this usage because it... because enemies will, because of its high HP, enemies will take a lot longer to kill it. I stumbled a little over that one. Offensively, it's okay. It does 2d4 plus 4 slashing damage, so a little better than the badger, a little worse than the wolf. and that again goes up a little bit over the levels, but it scales a little less each level than the others. The other wild shape forms get an extra d6 at level 4. The bear form only gets an extra d4 at level 4. It also comes with the Goading Roar ability, which you might remember from the Bear Companion from the Beastmaster Ranger video. Goading Roar is a weird ability that doesn't work at all the way that it says it does. So what it says it does is it's going to force enemies to attack this character. What it doesn't do at all is that. Enemy AI, when hit by Goading Roar, doesn't change at all. They're going to mostly act normally. But what it does do is give them disadvantage on all of their attack rolls, including against the bear, the originator. And so having a large AoE disadvantage on all of their attack rolls, they have to make a wisdom save against the druid save DC. Otherwise, they're affected by this. And there's no save on subsequent turns, even though the tooltip says there is going to be one. So a wisdom save or AoE disadvantage is pretty powerful, and since this is a form that you're going to go into if you're trying to prevent enemies from damaging your squishier allies, this is a really nice ability to have. So if you need a tank, bear form is great. If you need damage, wolf form is great, and if you need crowd control, spider form is perfect. Next up, Halsin's Cave Bear Wild Shape, which is a unique wild shape only available to Halsin, and aside from the role-playing implications, is also extremely interesting mechanically. The Cave Bear Wild Shape has 36 HP compared to the bear's normal 30, but only 10 armor class compared to the bear's 12. That means you'll probably die at about the same rate at low levels, and even a little bit faster at high levels. The Cave Bear just has 6 more HP than the normal bear at every level. It has the bear's same HP per level scaling, so you'll end up with 117 at level 12, compared to the normal bear's 111. The main difference, though, is the attacks. You have 2d6 plus 5 on your claw attack, which is really high at early levels. And this also, again, increases as you level up. Gaining an extra d4, which then becomes a d6 and then a d8. By the time you get Halsin in your party, you probably have the extra d4 on this, because you'll usually get him around level 4, unless you're really rushing. And then also, once per battle, you get to use multi-attack, which does 2d6 plus 5 and a d8 plus 5 damage against the enemy. And so this is a really high damage attack. The multi-attack, obviously, having a once per battle cooldown is pretty bad, but the fact that it adds your strength twice, and remember, with Tavern Brawler, this plus 5 is going to be doubled to a plus 10. The fact that it adds your strength twice over makes this an incredibly high burst damage attack when you've given Tavern Brawler to Halsin, and so multi-attack can end up being ridiculously high damage. The chance to hit is okay as well, especially, again, with Tavern Brawler, and so this ends up being a very offensively oriented wild shape form in terms of its damage output that can also soak a ton of damage, and enemies will tend to target you because of your extremely low armor class. So while it's not as good at tanking because it doesn't come with goad, it's I think overall, if you're using Halsin, you're usually going to want to use the Cave Bear over the Polar Bear in general, because the extra damage is quite valuable, and this is a wild shape form that actually does really good damage. Another weird thing about the Cave Bear form for Halsin is that he always knows it, because it's unique to him. He can only use it if he has a wild shape charge. So you can't use it if you are a character that doesn't get wild shape charges, though there is an item that can give you a wild shape charge even if you aren't a druid, and then he can still turn into a Cave Bear. And it's always a bonus action whether or not he's a moon druid. So if he's a Circle of the Land druid, for example, he can wild shape either with an action into the other forms or with a bonus action into Cave Bear. The only way in the game to get wild shape on either action type, which is actually quite useful because it lets you chain your actions a little bit better. So some unique interactions for Halsin specifically, and a very solid wild shape form. The Deep Rothe. So at level 4, you get access to a new wild shape form, the Deep Rothe, which is this guy. And this has 23 hit points and 10 armor class, which is significantly lower armor class, of course, than most other wild shape forms, and lower hit points at this level than the spider or wolf, and significantly lower hit points than the bear. So the Deep Rothe for level 4 is definitely on the squishier side. On the other hand, offensively, it's extremely strong. Its gore attack does 3d4 plus 1d6 plus your strength modifier in damage, and then will also do additional strength modifier if you have Tavern Brawler. And so you can see that even with a level 4 character attacking a level 12 character, we've chunked them pretty well. You also get the charge ability, which does a smaller amount of damage, but takes your action and uses your movement speed, and knocks at all enemies in the area, or attacks all enemies along the way, and they make a strength save against your druid's spell save DC or get knocked prone. Importantly, this is a 2-turn prone duration, and that matters because if you have a way to prevent them from moving, say, for example, if they're in an entangle spell that you're concentrating on, then they won't be able to act at all, because characters that are prone for multiple turns and have no movement speed don't get up and just effectively stay stunned. And because it uses your move speed, when you are hasted, or if you have Long Strider on you, which of course you're a druid, so you should, you're going to be able to actually hit a lot of enemies with this. So this is a pretty powerful tool in a party that is capable of handing out movement penalties. So if you're working with, say, a tiger barbarian that's going to be knocking enemies prone and then immobilizing them with the bleed combination from tiger barbarian, then the Deep Rothe can be extremely powerful in that sort of setup. The downside is it's squishy, but offensively it's quite good. If you're not a moon druid, this is your best damage option at this level, if you're not Halsin, excuse me, this is your best damage option at this level, and that can be pretty powerful. I still generally prefer the wolf as a damage-oriented character, or a damage-oriented wild shape, because setting up criticals for your allies is going to be so much damage, but the Rothe's ability to knock enemies prone, do AoE damage, and have an extremely strong single target attack still makes it quite solid for killing enemies quickly. As a moon druid, you also get Dire Raven form at level 4, which lets you transform into a flying raven with 13 HP and 16 armor class, which is better armor class than other wild shape forms, but still not great at this level. And 13 HP is obviously terrible. Importantly, also, the health of the Dire Raven does not increase as you level up, so it's always going to be 13 HP. It comes with 2 attacks, the Beak attack, which does okay damage, and the Rend Vision attack, which can do a little less damage and have a chance to blind enemies. But because this wild shape form has such low hit points and doesn't scale its HP, this is like the cat, mostly for out-of-combat exploration. Just when you need to be able to fly, the ability to spend a wild shape form to do that is very helpful. Starting at level 6, you get 2 new wild shape forms, the first of which is the Panther form. Panther has 45 HP at base and 14 armor class, and this goes up to 68 HP at level 12. So it's definitely on the squishier side. It will not be a sustained brawler the way that many of the higher health wild shape forms will, but it's survivable enough at level 6 that you will be able to take an attack before losing wild shape form, and it comes with a few ways to get out of bad situations. It also has really, really high damage, which is the main thing that you want Panther form for. 3d6 plus a d4 plus your strength modifier piercing damage just on the basic attack. And at this point, you're druid level 6, so you will have the extra wild shape attack, so you'll be able to attack twice in a turn. And so you can use the Panther form attacks multiple times. You also have Jugular Strike, which allows you to do even more damage against prone enemies, and this also is just an attack, so against a prone creature, you're doing 3d6 plus double your strength modifier plus a d4, and so you get a lot of additional damage against the enemy, especially when you have Tavern Brawler, and that strength damage is being multiplied. To knock enemies prone, you have Pounce, which is a once per turn ability that lets you jump, hit an enemy for pretty similar damage to your bite attack. The 2d8 plus 1d6 plus your strength is pretty similar to your basic attack here. But then they also have to make a strength save against your druid save DC or they get knocked prone. Now, Pounce is a full action. It doesn't use an attack action, so you can't do this and then Jugular Strike in the same turn. So usually you're going to need something else to knock the enemy prone to make use of Jugular Strike, unless you have, unless you're hasted on this creature. But if you, again, have a lot of synergy with prone, the ability to make multiple Jugular Strikes in a turn can be a ridiculous amount of damage, and knocking enemies prone with Pounce is also quite good. Finally, you have the Prowl ability, which, it doesn't say this in the description, but it's once per short rest. You can activate this to turn invisible, and then you will be able to deal an extra d8 damage on your first attack. So, obviously, this lets you avoid taking damage, get into position, and doing more damage. Now, unfortunately, this ability is heavily bugged, and starting at Druid level 8, it basically stops working. If you activate Prowl on a level 8 character and then move, it just breaks the Prowl. So for some reason, there are severe bugs with this ability. And you also lose the extra d8 of damage. It doesn't do the bonus damage starting at level 8. So at level 6 and 7, this is a pretty nice ability. But thanks to some bugs, it ceases working pretty quickly. The second wild shape form that you get at level 6 is Owlbear form, and this is in many ways the king of the wild shapes. Owlbear form has 65 base hit points, and then those will increase up to 112 at level 12, so it has a huge amount of HP. And it also has 15 armor class, so its armor class is better than most other wild shape forms, even though this is quite low, and you can increase it a little bit further with some spell effects and stuff like that. But even though this is quite low, the Owlbear is pretty tanky with 15 AC and 65 hit points at this level, and 112 hit points is obviously a pretty significant amount. The real thing that the Owlbear has going for it, though, is that it is really strong offensively and extremely mobile and extremely easy to use. And it also has some other defensive abilities. The first and one that you kind of have to look at is Enrage here, because the Owlbear's base damage is going to be much higher in actual combat because you're almost always going to be enraged. You can use this as a bonus action, and the Owlbear comes with rage charges, just like a barbarian, and gain strength, gain extra temporary hit points, and make every nearby enemy make a constitution save against your druid's spell save DC, or they become fearful and run away. Now, this works on every nearby creature. It's not just enemies, so you can accidentally fear your allies. It's also funny that it's a constitution save to avoid becoming fearful. Most mental conditions are a wisdom save, but this one you resist with your muscles. And because it increases your strength, you get double that bonus to the... you get double the extra strength when you have Tavern Brawler. So Owlbear Rage works extremely well with Tavern Brawler, and it already has really high strength, so Tavern Brawler is incredible for this wild shape form. That means that you're usually going to be doing 2d8 plus a d4 plus 12 base damage with your claw attacks, which is a huge amount of damage at level 6. The damage goes up just a little bit every level, but you get an extra d4, or an extra... The D4 becomes a D6 starting at level 8, and then becomes a D8 starting at level 12. So it's a reasonable amount of extra damage, but not... Or a little bit of extra damage, but nothing major. But the base damage on this is already really good. You also have Crushing Flight, which lets you jump using your bonus action, so you can do this and then still make an attack. And you can jump a massive distance with Crushing Flight because of the Owlbear's really high strength, even higher when you're raging. And then deal 2d8 plus 1d4 bludgeoning damage, again going up to a d6 and then a d8, to nearby creatures, and they have to make a strength save or they get knocked prone. Prone as a bonus action, of course, is great. It means you'll often be making your attacks with advantage because you'll have knocked the enemies prone, and of course it has all of the normal beneficial effects that knocking things prone has. Also, this can be used to deal falling damage. Now, I've shown a few builds that work with Crushing Flight, of course, and many people have seen the Owlbear off the top rope videos and stuff like that. But when you Crushing Flight down onto an enemy from high up, your Owlbear's massive weight, because Owlbears are very heavy, will allow you to deal extra damage. You won't take damage because you're jumping, but Owlbears weigh over 1,000 pounds by default. And then if you're using enlarge effects or Colossus elixirs, that multiplies your weight by 10, and so you're going to end up weighing 100,000 pounds and being able to one-shot everything. Even if you're not using the Crushing Flight one-shot tools, Owlbear form is still incredible. You also have a Rupture, which is AoE damage, and a Knockback. Again, this can hit your allies, so you do have to be a little careful with the Owlbear positioning, but AoE Knockback is pretty helpful. Strength save or be knocked back 10 feet, and that can throw a bunch of enemies off the cliff, and off cliffs or something. And remember, you can Crushing Flight to put yourself in a good position in order to do it. One other important thing with Owlbears, though, is that if they're following your character and you jump, so if they're just on auto follow here, and they jump, they will use Crushing Flight by default as their jump. So be really careful with an Owlbear in a city, because it's going to accidentally squash NPCs as it walks past, and that can get you in trouble with the guards. At level 8, if you're a Moon Druid, you also get access to the Sabre-Toothed Tiger form, which is very similar to the Panther form, but generally speaking, better overall. You don't get the ability to pounce and knock enemies prone, but you get all of the other abilities of the Panther, the Bite, which does really, really good damage, the Jugular Strike, so against enemies that are prone, you have incredible damage against prone enemies. And you also passively regenerate 2d8 hit points every turn. So that means that even though you only have 62 HP and only 13 armor class, which is definitely on the low side, the Sabre-Toothed Tiger can usually survive a couple hits before you lose your hit points and have to re-wild shape, which makes it a fairly powerful option. The other ability that it has is Shred Armor, which lets you hit an enemy, and if you hit, it reduces their armor class by 2 for 2 turns. The tooltip here says 1, but it's actually 2. This is not usually a particularly powerful ability and not usually worth using your attack on. I'd rather just do more damage most of the time. But if there's an enemy that you know a fight is going to go long against and you want to debuff them, this is an okay way to do it. Mostly this is just an upgrade that keeps Panther form relevant at level 8, especially because the stalk ability is bugged, and so you can't turn invisible. This just increases the damage and survivability of Panther form. At Druid level 10, you get access to the Dilophosaurus form, which looks awesome. I love the model for this guy. And is a really interesting capstone form, because you'd expect something that would just be a combat powerhouse, but this is kind of a cross between a really high damage wild shape form and a utility form, but not very tanky, which means that it's more of a side grade to the Owlbear that gives you some alternative options, especially in longer fights, than just a strict upgrade, which I actually think is more fun because you get more decisions to make. The Dilophosaurus has 74 hit points, going up to 96 at level 12, and 14 armor class, which makes it relatively squishy. You're definitely going to die pretty quickly on the Dilophosaurus if enemies target you, and they'll target you pretty frequently. But while they're doing that, you're going to be dishing out great damage. The Bite attack is 1d10 plus 2d8, 1d8 of which is acid, plus your strength, which again, benefiting from Tavern Brawler. And because you have improved Wild Strike at level 10, you're going to be able to do this 3 times in a turn, which is a pretty incredible amount of damage. Getting to hit with all of these attacks is like 60 damage, which is not bad at all. You also have Pounce. This is a bonus action, which is 2d6 plus 1d8 plus strength damage, knocking an enemy prone with a strength save against your druid's spell save DC, so they're very likely to get knocked prone here, and that can mean that you're making all of your bite attacks with advantage, possibly critically hitting as well. In addition to this really powerful offense where you're making, 4 good attacks in a turn, you also have a weird ranged action, Corrosive Spit. Corrosive Spit is a 60-foot range Constitution save for 2d8, for 3d8 acid damage. It goes up to 2d8 plus a d10 at level 12. And when an enemy is hit by it, their AC decreases by 1 at the beginning of each of their turns to a maximum penalty of -5. So in really long fights, -5 AC is a lot. And while this isn't, of course, a great action, it's not an attack, it's an action. So you have to spend your entire turn on it. And while this isn't like a great attack and a great ranged action, it does give a wild shape form a ranged action, which is something that they usually don't have. And that can be pretty powerful to give yourself the ability to attack from range and be relevant even at the beginning of a fight before you might be able to get into place. Now, of course, you also have pounce, so you're likely to be able to jump to enemies, but this is still a pretty helpful thing to have. And in longer boss fights, it can be pretty nice. So the Owlbear form, I think, is better generally speaking, but the Dilophosaurus form... yeah, and of course you take the Corrosive Spit does additional damage and continuously decreases your armor class. Does damage every turn and continuously decreases your armor class. Excuse me. So in longer fights, especially against bosses, the Dilophosaurus can actually be a pretty powerful tool. Owlbear is more generically applicable in other fights, but in boss fights, the Dilophosaurus is great. Also at level 10, if you're a moon druid, you get access to the 4 elemental Myrmidon forms. Now these are unique in that they consume both of your wild shape charges to use. So you can't use them to absorb hit point damage as easily as you can the other wild shape forms, because those you get twice as many uses of. But the double charge for the Myrmidon wild shapes are absolutely worth it. These forms are incredibly powerful, especially because of some of the interactions that they have with the fact that you're a player character. I did my summons tier list and talked about a lot of the abilities of these units already, but some of the things that they do as summons are significantly stronger when you do them as a player. First up, let's look at the Earth Myrmidon. So you get a bunch of damage resistances, immunity to poison, and resistance to non-magical physical damage, which is very helpful for maintaining your wild shape hit points, of course, and staying in wild shape form. You have 103 hit points going up to 124 at level 4, and 18 armor class, which is also relatively tanky at this level. 18 isn't an incredible armor class, but it's enough that enemies won't hit you incredibly reliably. They won't hit you every single time, and combined with a decent hit point total, you're going to be pretty tanky. You can also increase your armor class with the Muck to Metal ability. You spend 20 feet of your movement speed and you get +2 AC. And it says that it reduces your move speed by 20 feet every subsequent turn. It doesn't. So the Earth Myrmidon in actual combat will have 20 AC basically all the time. You just spend the initial move speed on the first cast of this, and then you have full move speed for the rest of the 4-turn duration of the effect. The Earth Myrmidon also has Burrow as a bonus action, allowing you to do 2d8 bludgeoning damage with a dex save for half to nearby enemies. This being a bonus action means that it's going to be basically free damage, and it's a teleport, so it can let you reposition, which is pretty helpful. You also, like every Myrmidon, have the Elemental Warp teleport, which is basically at-will Misty Step, also extremely powerful. You also have Sludgy Sling, which does a small amount of damage to creatures in the radius, including friendly creatures, and creates a mud surface. This is also bugged, and the save DC, in order to avoid the damage, which is only 2d6 damage anyways, is locked at DC 13. It doesn't use the Druid save DC, so you wouldn't be activating this ability anyways, because it really just doesn't do enough to justify spending an action on, but especially not because it's bugged. The real benefit of the Earth Myrmidon, though, is its basic attack is ridiculous. Grounded Thunderstrike does 1d10 plus your strength modifier damage plus 3d10 thunder. The tooltip here is wrong. It does 3d10 thunder damage. And enemies have to make a saving throw or be knocked prone. Remember that as a druid, you have improved wild strike at this point, and so you can attack 3 times in a single round. So the amount of damage that you can dish out as an Earth Myrmidon is ridiculous. It also is bugged in addition to that because the Tavern Brawler damage, and of course you have Tavern Brawler if you're going for this, gets applied to both the bludgeoning damage and the thunder damage. So you get to double dip on Tavern Brawler in addition to how much Tavern Brawler already insanely improves your damaging output. And so an Earth Myrmidon, because it's attacking 3 times in a turn with an absurd amount of additional damage, just dishes out the most damage that a wild shape form can do, while also being incredibly tanky. Most Moon Druids who have access to Earth Myrmidon form are going to use this as their main combat form, because the sheer amount of damage output that you do is unbelievably powerful. The Water Myrmidon. So the Water Myrmidon has 90 hit points and 18 armor class, so a little bit less tanky than the Earth Myrmidon, especially because you can't raise its armor class with an ability. It also comes with damage resistances, has acid resistance, and is immune to poison, and can fly permanently, which is very helpful, of course, because it gives you even more mobility in addition to the elemental warp teleport that all of the Myrmidons already come with. The Water Myrmidon's main hand attack is useless because it has a strictly better other attack. The main hand attack is just a small damaging attack with cold, but you can use High Strike here, which is also an attack action and does more damage and has a chance to chill enemies, so there's no reason to ever use the main hand attack. High Strike has can be used 3 times a turn, because you have improved Wild Strike, of course, and does a d8 plus a d6 plus a d10, and some of that is cold damage, plus a bunch of damage from your weapon attacks. Now, importantly, the Water Myrmidon is not unarmed, so while the Earth Myrmidon uses Tavern Brawler, the other 3 Myrmidons don't benefit from Tavern Brawler because they're actually using a weapon, although they can benefit from a couple passive abilities that improve weapon attacks. But you're going to give up some accuracy and some damage compared to the Earth Myrmidon because you don't have Tavern Brawler. What you do have is the ability to apply vulnerability against cold damage. When you hit with High Strike, enemies have to make a Constitution save or become chilled, and that gives them vulnerability to cold damage. So in a cold damage focused party, 3 saving throws against vulnerability is really powerful. Now, of course, you can apply vulnerability without a saving throw using Create Water or throwing a water bottle, but the fact that this also does consistent damage while you're doing it is pretty nice. In addition to that, you have Explosive Icicle, a ranged attack that fires essentially 3 chromatic orbs, so it does decent range damage, 3d8 cold damage, and creates 3 ice surfaces. And because you're a druid, those ice surfaces will use your spell save DC, so enemies will fall prone on the ice surface pretty frequently. And you have Healing Vapors, which in combat can be constant, steady healing for your summons and your allies. It can only be used in combat, but it creates a 30-foot radius area where everything inside of it heals. If you're poisoned, they take damage. That's mostly not relevant. That doesn't come up very frequently. But the extra healing that you can do for an army of summons, which, since you're a druid, there's a good chance you have at least a few of those kicking around, can be very helpful as well. Primarily, I would use the Water Myrmidon in a very cold-focused party in order to minimize the number of water bottles and stuff that you have to throw. I will say that as a wild shape form, this is less exciting than as a summon because you don't get the benefits of Tavern Brawler, so you give up some of what makes wild shape forms incredibly strong. And you also, applying vulnerability for cold damage is less exciting when it requires your actual character doing it, because they could have just thrown a water bottle if you were going to spend a character action on it. Obviously, this does damage as well, and is still pretty powerful, but I think that the Water Myrmidon as a wild shape form is generally going to be a little bit overshadowed by the other ones. The Air Myrmidon. So the Air Myrmidon uses a weapon, so it doesn't benefit from Tavern Brawler, but despite this, that weapon is so powerful that the Air Myrmidon is awesome. Just like the other non-Earth Myrmidons, it has permanent flying, and it has resistance to non-magical physical damage, and also resistance to thunder and lightning, which in some encounters are pretty powerful, and immunity to poison. It has 90 HP, going up to 108 at character level 12, and 18 armor class, which again is moderately tanky. Remember also that with the, if you're a Moon Druid, in order to wild shape into these forms, you have Lunar Mend, and repairing the hit points of your Myrmidon's forms in combat is a lot more exciting than repairing the HP of your other wild shape forms, because you want to stay in Myrmidon form as long as possible. The Air Myrmidon also has once per short rest invisibility, which of course is pretty helpful for starting combats by surprise and positioning yourself before combat starts. And has the Raging Vortex ability, which lets you summon a gigantic AoE that silences and does damage every turn. There's no save on this effect, so a big AoE silence is pretty powerful, especially to have on a wild shape form that's otherwise an incredible brawler. You also have permanent flying, and you have elemental warp for even more mobility, so you can make your way around the map very easily. Your basic attack, again, there's not really a reason to use your basic attack on this character, because it's just a d8 of lightning damage on top of a minor attack. But you also have the Electrified Flail ability, which does more damage, with extra lightning damage, and enemies have to make a saving throw. It's locked at DC 13. It doesn't use your Druid spell save DC, but a DC 13 con save, or they become stunned. You can use Electrified Flail multiple times in a turn, because of having improved Wild Strike. And so that lets you have 3 rolls to stun an enemy while dishing out incredible damage every single turn. That's very, very powerful. Enemies are going to fail this, even though the save DC is pretty low. You're making you're making them roll a lot of dice, and so you can keep a lot of enemies stunned, or one particularly dangerous enemy stunned, pretty consistently by just hitting them 3 times with Electrified Flail. Obviously, this also does really solid damage, and that damage gets increased even further against enemies who are wet, which, if you have a Druid in the party, there's a good chance that you're building at least somewhat around wet effects, so the lightning damage is likely to be doubled. So Electrified Flail, just spamming out the attack and stunning enemies over and over, is pretty powerful. This is one of the Myrmidons that gets a massive bonus from being a player character and getting 3 attacks, with an attack that's really supposed to only happen once per turn, because you can dish out just so many stuns with the Air Myrmidon. Generally, the Earth Myrmidon is better at brawling, and so it's still going to be the preferred option for most combats. But if there are combats where you're worried about enemies taking an action and you just want to consistently lock them down, this is a great way to have a no-cost way to constantly be stunning enemies, costing them action economy. The Fire Myrmidon. So the Fire Myrmidon has some really cool interactions that are very much worth knowing about, especially in Honor mode, with being a player character. Firstly, it has a bunch of resistances, but is also completely immune to fire damage, which is very relevant. There's a lot of fights, even in the late game, with lots of fire damage, and being completely immune means that you can become a Fire Myrmidon and safely wade through those fights without any problem. Poison immunity, also relevant in some encounters, even in the late game. It has the same HP and armor class as the other non-Earth Myrmidons, 18 armor class and 90 HP, going up to 108 at level 12. And it has the same thing where its main hand attack is relatively weak, but it also has a special weapon action with no cooldown, so you can just use this instead. The Scorching Strike attack is a little bit lower damage and a little bit lower impact than the other Myrmidon's attacks, but still does pretty good damage. 2d6 plus 1d10 plus 7 is not bad. Burning a target is obviously worse than chilling or stunning, or especially than stunning them, but the extra little bit of burning damage can be okay. Cinderous Swipe is an attack in a cone, but this takes your entire action. It is not just a weapon attack, and so you will usually get more damage just by attacking 3 times with Scorching Strike than using Cinderous Swipe. I would rarely want to use this. The main thing that's important to know about the Fire Myrmidon is that Myrmidon's Immolation, which is a self-haste ability, which hastes you for 3 turns, and you concentrate on it for 3 turns, getting the full value of haste, makes you incredibly mobile, of course, because it increases your movement speed and lets you get close to enemies much more easily. But also, it is unique on Honor Mode, in that it is a haste form of haste that works with improved Wild Strike. So when you cast Myrmidon's Immolation, if you hasted yourself, you would only get 1 extra attack on Honor Mode, or 3 extra attacks on lower difficulties, because of the way that haste works differently on Honor Mode. If you use Myrmidon's Immolation on yourself, even on Honor Mode, you get the full 3 extra attacks, so you're going to get 6 attacks in a given turn. With Scorching Strike, and that can be a lot of additional damage. Nope, we broke concentration and stunned myself there as I was trying to demo that because of the return damage. You do have to be careful of that. That's kind of funny, but that can be a huge amount of additional damage. And since it is at will self-haste, you get to make 6 attacks basically every turn of combat when playing this character. It's still going to be lower damage than the Earth Myrmidon's 3 attacks, because those individual attacks hit so hard and so accurately. But if you need extra mobility with the Fire Myrmidon, or if the fire immunity is relevant, this Wild Shape form does comparable damage to the Earth Myrmidon, because it makes just so many attacks. Also, because you're making 6 attacks per turn, it's fairly likely that like 1 or 2 of them will critical as well, and so you get even more damage. And so the Fire Myrmidon ends up being what you would kind of expect it to be, a mobile striker, where if you need a specific enemy that's hard to reach dead, you can get to it with the Fire Myrmidon thanks to its incredible mobility, and kill it almost certainly thanks to its absurd damage output with 6 attacks in a given round. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Wild Shape forms for Druid, and I hope it helps you pick which form to Wild Shape into. Like I said at the beginning, a very solid heuristic is use Spider until level 6, use Owlbear until level 10, then use Earth Myrmidon form. But there's a lot of extra value that you can get out of swapping in between forms, depending on the encounter. For longer boss fights, Dilophosaurus or Air Myrmidon are very helpful. Deep Rothe can work very, very well with parties that have a lot of prone synergy, and so there's a lot of different forms that you can, and Wolf makes a really good early game damage source. There's a lot of different forms that you can swap into depending on what your party needs, and you can get some advantages by wild shaping into the appropriate animal. It's not quite as balanced as the Beastmaster companions. I think that some wild shape forms definitely are better than others, you know, the ones that I mentioned as being particularly good, but even the ones that are less generally applicable can be really good in certain circumstances. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a comment. Let me know if there's anything I wasn't considering about any of these wild shape forms that you think deserves to be in the conversation. And of course, you can hit the like button, which helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And as always, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.